of these old days, one of these old days, and we won't stop.
What's up, everybody? This is Mike, your host for Transitions for More. And before we get started for today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about our sponsor, Tattered Beans. I just got some awesome K-Cups yesterday. And K-Cups, for those of you who do not know, are the Keurig pods that you put in your Keurig coffee maker. Big hit these days. I got one of those at work. And yesterday was the first time I tried out the 4th Quarter Strong blend. And wow, I really have to say, lots of caffeine in there. It gives you a nice little jolt. Here's the cool thing, though. This 4th Quarter Strong Tattered Beans blend, no jitters. And I have drank a lot of coffee, a lot of different kinds of coffee. I know what it's like to be jittery and have that kind of dirty buzz, as I call it. But this is a nice, strong, clean buzz, I guess. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. So links are in the show notes of how you can get your own Tattered Beans coffee. And in case you haven't heard, every time you purchase Tattered Beans through my link, every time you buy a bag of coffee, whether it's ground or whole bean, or whether you're getting the K-Cups, a portion of that purchase, about $4, goes to my Ironman Foundation fundraiser, which is raising money for the Gold Star Initiative, which I have talked a lot about, but it's bringing Gold Star families and veterans together to race in the Ironman world. I'll be doing one of those coming up next month, and I'm really excited to talk about that, but more to come. Here's one thing that's cool about Tattered Beans. You can do a one-time purchase, or you can subscribe, and I would recommend subscribing, because then, if and when you get your Tattered Beans and you say, hey, this is the kind of coffee I like, this is the cause I like supporting, this is the business model I can get behind, you just get a monthly shipment or more. Customize that. So you're going to see a little selection under the size of coffee and type of coffee you want to get, where it says join the caffeine club, and you can click either one-time purchase or subscribe. So go ahead and subscribe there. Anyways, Tattered Beans, good stuff, awesome coffee. I am proud to be a sponsored athlete with Tattered Beans coffee. So with that said, you guys, this is going to be a fun show. And we haven't talked to many Vietnam vets on the show before. And our guest today might be the first. Really cool guy. David Lucier was a Green Beret in Vietnam. And he talks about a lot about the experience of coming home and transition. The exact thing we're talking about in this podcast. So you will enjoy that. And I really believe that David's strength comes out in how he speaks and the wisdom behind his words, but the gentleness and the thoughtfulness in which he chooses his words. So you guys are really going to enjoy that. Also, coming soon, an announcement, I will be co-hosting another podcast. So I will link to some of that stuff. You can check it out. But we're going to shift gears a little bit. And Transitions for More is still continuing. Do not worry. That's happening. We're going to continue to talk to veterans. We're going to continue to talk to people who know about what it's like to transition out of the military back into civilian life, reconnect to purpose, reconnect to mind, body, and spirit. This other podcast I'm co-hosting with a new friend is going to be geared towards multi-sport, endurance sports, triathlon, trail running, all that fun stuff. So if you enjoy hearing what I have to say, you might enjoy what I have to say with my new teammate, Lindsay. More to come on that. That's just a little teaser for you. So all that being said, enjoy the episode today, guys. And if you can, subscribe to this podcast, either on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher. You can find it on YouTube, all kinds of places. Subscribe and leave us a review, especially on iTunes. That helps us be more visible. Share this with someone who you think should listen to this podcast. None of that. Thanks for being here, guys. Really appreciate you listening. Really enjoy the fact that people are providing feedback. People are enjoying what they hear. If there's something specific you guys want to hear, let me know. Hit me up on our Facebook or Instagram page. All right, guys. Enough of me running my mouth. Enjoy the show. David, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Appreciate the time and look forward to our chat.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit offline about having spent some time in some of the same places, and we'll get to that in a bit. But first off, I'm honored to have you on the show, and every time I meet a Vietnam vet, I make sure to tell them welcome home, because
thanks.
Vietnam vets played a big role in my transition to civilian life. I had a neighbor who saw me get back, and he was an Army infantry captain in Vietnam, and he looked at me, he's like, yeah, you kind of look like I did when I got back from Vietnam. So he drugged my ass to a vet center and made sure I got the care I needed and started talking to someone. It made it okay for me to really sit down and talk to someone. So I appreciate that. I always will. So I'd like to hear a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your backstory before you came to be an advocate for veterans. We'll get into that because I think you're doing some important work. So
thanks.
Tell me a little bit about yourself growing up. I know you said you're from Florida.
Well, I was born in Florida. That's about as far as it goes. I left there as an infant and did my grade school K through 8 in Rochester, New York. And then we moved to St. Louis, where I went through high school. And shortly after high school, that's when I joined the Army. And so I enlisted. It was, at that time, it was February of 1967. The war and the draft were in full swing. And so anybody who didn't go from high school to college or have some type of occupational deferment was swept up pretty quickly. The joke was at the time that if you had a heartbeat, you were going to get drafted. And that was just about the case. But I was really, I wanted to go in the Army at the time. I thought I came across this folder one time about these Green Berets, and they were all lined up and looking good. And so I thought, I looked into it, and I thought, I might be able. I thought I could do that. And so when I joined the Army, I asked the guy, can I sign up for Special Forces? And he says, well, no, not really. You can't do that, but I can sign you up for airborne infantry. And they recruit out of airborne infantry. And I thought, okay.
So you get your foot in the door that way.
I get my foot in the door. He said, there's no promises because, you got to pass background checks and you got to pass a certain number of skill tests, written. You physically got to do stuff. He said, it's not easy. So, but I took up the challenge and decided I'd give it a try. So I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, went to Airborne Infantry AIT at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and then went to Fort Benning at the jump school there and earned my parachute badge. And sure enough, about midway through the comes in, says, hey, if you want to think about doing this, come over to, such and such a room at such and such a time, which I did. And standing there was, guy that looked like he just fell out of a, central casting, big guy, square jaw, short haircut, all that stuff. So,
well, before we get any farther on this, both your parents are vets. Is that correct?
Yes, they are. As a matter of fact, my dad was a lieutenant commander in the Navy. He graduated Notre Dame in 42 and immediately went into the Navy. Spent a couple of years on a destroyer in the South Pacific. In fact, his XO that he served with, and I didn't know this till years later, turned out to be Admiral Zumwalt, who
no kidding.
was the chief of naval operations during Vietnam. So I just happened to be looking at some, I was fooling around on the internet, came across a picture, and it was a crew picture, and there was my dad, and there was Zumwalt in the crew picture, and he was the XO. They had been awarded, I think, 16 battle stars, so it was one of the most highly decorated ships in that theater at the time. So then my mom was a women's air service pilot. The numbers there, really? 25,000 of them applied. I think 1,800 were accepted, and 1,100 made it through the training. So it was a pretty restrictive program. And these were women who were very accomplished in the aviation field. Several of them had already established themselves as world record holders in, different different areas. So yeah, I had and my grandfather was a World War I U.S. Army infantry captain in France. Again, World War I. So my military lineage goes back, a couple of generations, and I also happen to have had a distant relative serve in the Union Army during the Civil War. So
yeah, you have quite the lineage there.
A lot of service.
So did your parents instill military discipline or these values with you growing up?
They were, this was post World War II, so it makes me a baby boomer. And I think my mom was from state of Washington, and my dad was from Abilene, Kansas. And so I think that there was just some, just good basic, I guess I would call American values, or, just a good basic set of values that were then sort of, they were, what's the word I'm trying to look for here? They were reinforced by things that, they learned and experienced in the military during World War II. And
I see, that makes sense.
So I'm only one sibling of 11 siblings, so you can see I always say
wow.
they loved each other. So there was a lot going on, big family post World War II. We were raised Catholic, so there was that influence. So there was a lot going on to give us, I guess, that there was a transfer of values there for all of us, and that stayed with us the rest of our lives.
And so it follows you into the military. And was it a culture shock? Was it what you expected when you went into the Army, and you go through basic and then you go through airborne school?
It actually wasn't much. In fact, I knew a lot about the Army by the time I got in the Army. One of the reasons was that I went to a junior ROTC high school. So I knew, I had the culture, and I had the hand salute, and I knew how to march, and I had most of the stuff that you kind of learn in basic. I had some rifle skills, and weapon skills. We were, this was in the early 60s. And so all the weaponry that we were taught on, all the small arms, was all World War II stuff. And so when I
Oh,
got
wow.
to,
Okay.
and I got in the Army, I sort of knew about uniforms and inspections and PT and marching and small weapons, military, particularly the Army, because this was an Army ROTC, JROTC unit, high school. So, there wasn't really much of a shock. As a matter of fact, because they were short on cadre at the time, because of Vietnam, they'd asked if anybody had JROTC experience, and I sort of sheepishly raised my hand. And so it made me a little, like a platoon leader or something. And so it was my responsibility to make sure that all these folks, got some of the, basic training. So I helped in that regard. So that really wasn't much of a shock. It was the PT was a bit of a shock, but being 19 years old and healthy and all that, you just sort of push through it and advance. I mean, you get better and better at it. So, and from basic to AIT to jump school, that was, I'm trying to think, it was a lot of months of nothing but PT. And
Right.
So by the time I finished jump school, I was in probably, some of the best shape I'd been in my life. So that wasn't much of a shock. What was a little bit disconcerting was the Special Forces training, and the amount of it, the diversity of it, the difficulty of it. But that was part of the deal. So I was.
Did you go right into that after jump school?
Yeah. Moved. They picked. Let's see. I'm trying to think how many people out of jump school. There was about a half a dozen of us that came out of jump school, and where everybody else, as a matter of fact, was assigned to, got pretty much immediate orders to Vietnam with a airborne infantry unit, either the 173rd, who was getting their ass kicked all over Vietnam at the time. The news was not good for the 173rd, and or the 101st, and that's where those folks went, and they were in. They were in Vietnam. They went to Vietnam as I went to Fort Bragg.
Yeah. And so how long did you spend in training for Special Forces?
Well, almost 2 years. Well, the total length of time of training was 2 years, and Special Forces was probably a year and a half of that. And then I graduated, was immediately assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group. And then shortly after that, I got my orders for Vietnam to go to the 5th Special Forces Group there in Vietnam.
And did you go by yourself, or were you sent out with anyone else?
There were a couple of folks from my Special Forces training group that I knew that we went, but we were sent on individual orders. Really, just coincidentally, they bundled us. We didn't go.
Yeah.
We didn't go as a unit or anything.
That's one of the biggest differences I've seen between the Vietnam vets and the Iraq and Afghanistan vets is that most of you guys were just sent over individually and showed up and left.
Yeah.
And most of us go as a unit. And so I mean, been looking at the implications of what that means in terms of readjustment, in terms of being able to process, some of the stuff you saw, a lot different.
Yeah.
So you show up in Vietnam, and by this time, is it 69, 68?
It's November of 68. So it was not that much after Tet. You could, when I got there, you could still see that there were, you could see the effects that Tet, the toll that Tet had taken in a lot of places. By the time I got there, they were already talking about kind of some people called it post-Tet, others called it Tet 2, or the second Tet offensive. I ended up making my way to a kind of an obscure unit called the Mobile Strike Force, the 2 Corps each corps had a mobile strike force, and each it was made up of several battalions in each corps area, and we had one A team that was assigned to build basically one battalion of airborne infantry, mobile strike force strikers who were made up of ethnic tribal peoples. Some had never even almost seen an airplane, much less ride in one and jump out of one. But
okay, you're working with the Montagnards and
yep.
the Hmong?
Montagnards, and they were the main ethnic group. There were some others, Chinese Noongs, Cambodians, some Hmong, but mostly made up of the ethnic Montagnards, of which there were several tribes, maybe 25 or 30 tribes. Each one spoke a different language and they had a different dialect. A lot of them had different cultures. Some were hunter-gatherers, others were agrarian, and the folks that I worked with, which were called the Sedang Montagnards, were cannibals prior to the French missionaries getting a hold of them and convincing them that maybe that wasn't the greatest way of life ever. But they were warriors. This was a tribe of warriors, and they were fierce. No two ways about it, and very loyal. But the loyalty, you had to sort of prove yourself. If you showed any kind of hesitation on the battlefield or hesitation when it came to just getting stuff done, they saw that pretty quickly and reacted negatively. They wouldn't work as hard, but these folks were really good. So we had 2 Americans with each company, and so myself and another Special Forces NCO were responsible for this company
tactically,
logistically, administratively. So
I'm curious, what's going through your head? You show up into their village, knowing that they're a generation away from eating people. So you step off the bird or walk in and introduce yourself. I mean, what's that like to make contact?
Pretty interesting. Unfortunately for me, I didn't know about their cannibalistic background. So maybe at the time I didn't learn about that until later, which is probably a good thing.
Probably for the better, right?
Yeah. So, it was, again, I'm 20 years old, and I'm running an infantry company against the North Vietnamese Army, of which most 2 of the units that we constantly came in contact with were units that had been highly decorated and really memorialized at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And so, of course, that battle was the decisive battle that the Vietnamese were victorious over the French, and that was the battle that was the last battle of the French Indochina War, and the French then left. They were basically kicked out of the country, and the Vietnamese took over their country again. So it was very, very interesting. I mean, I was wide-eyed. I really didn't know what to expect, but I had a job to do, and I kind of stayed focused on that. And I had a lot of help from a lot of experienced NCOs. Most of the folks on my team had lots of experience. In fact, you weren't able to get on a Mike Force team unless you had at least one combat tour under your belt. And most of these folks had several, and that constituted several years. So I show up, and I'm the new kid on the block. I'm the youngest one. All the other NCOs were probably 6-7 years older than I was. And of course, they were late 20s, and they looked like old men to me. But
I remember that being in boot camp. Anyone who was over 22 was middle-aged.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the way it was here. And so it was, but they were very, very supportive. They really wanted, I was part of the team. The team, they were highly motivated to make sure that the team was successful, and they were very, very helpful. In fact, they kept me out of a lot of trouble and kept me alive, throughout my tour. So the whole experience was pretty surreal, but I managed to do it, and apparently was fairly successful. Was decorated a couple of times, and so these Montagnards, getting back to that, were hugely supportive. Each American had at least one bodyguard, because there was only two of us, and they knew that if one of us got hurt or we got hurt, if we were out of the fight, that was the end of artillery, that was the end of air support, that was the end of supplies. And so
you were the bridge to all of that.
Yeah, and so we had bodyguards, and we had several instances where our bodyguards laid down their lives for us.
So needless to say, you saw quite a lot during your time there. Were you there for the typical 1-year tour?
Yeah. Although I don't think my tour was very typical.
I wouldn't say typical. I guess only the time frame maybe.
It was typically 12 months. And so that was my tour. And I was at the end of my enlistment. And so I had to make a choice of staying in or leaving. And I was offered an OCS slot if I wanted to stay in, and I was also offered a slot on the team if I wanted to continue that. And so I actually communicated with my dad, and ultimately decided that it was time for me to move on. I was at the end of that tour, the end of that year, I was pretty used up, mentally, physically, spiritually. It was a long haul, and it was just time for me to, like I say, move on. So I told him, no, I've decided that I'm going to leave Vietnam, leave Special Forces, and leave the Army. And the plan was to really go back to school. It had always been, because all of my brothers and sisters were college educated, several with multiple degrees. And
all 10 of them, right?
All 11.
Okay.
Well,
so
10 siblings plus myself. So
okay. Yeah.
So the idea of not going on to college was, it was just never discussed. It's just something you didn't do. And so in my plan, my transition plan, if you will, I was going to come back, but it was going to be several months before I could actually start school. And so I took a job, worked for 9 months, almost 9 months. In the meantime, I had met a girl. In fact, I met her on my way to Vietnam, and we wrote letters the entire year. I came back. We saw each other again. We married in the end of August. And so while she lived in Seattle, I had then moved to Phoenix after the holidays. I stayed in St. Louis with my friends and families through the holidays, and then moved down to Phoenix to work and go to school. Which I did.
Let's talk about your experience coming back home.
Yeah.
What's it like? So I'm guessing you get on a plane, you leave from Vietnam, maybe make a couple stops along the way, and then where'd you land stateside?
McCord Air Force Base up in near Fort, right next to Fort
Right by
Lewis,
Fort Lewis.
Washington. Yeah, we flew in, and of course it's the end of November. It's cold, pretty wet, and in a winter time, and it was at night, and so one of the things that's just a stark fixed in my mind was getting out of the airplane, and a couple hours went by, and it was dinner time, and it was at night, and so they lined us up to go to what they at the time was called a mess hall, and it was pretty basic, and that's when mess halls were run by generally the services. So the cooks were service members. There was KP people on work in the kitchen and the line, and they were all service members. So, but before we got in there, we were all lined up outside, getting ready to go in, and there was a big sign, a big wooden sign with spotlights on it, and it said, welcome home to your first steak meal on U.S. soil. And I'm standing there,
Oh, wow,
freezing my ass off, and it's cold and it's dark, and we're hungry, and we're standing in line, and I'm thinking, wow, that's quite the welcome home.
Yeah.
Crappy old sign waiting to get fed. So, that stays in my mind.
Did you know coming back or before that the public support for the war had changed, and that the vets and service members were getting treated pretty poorly coming back home?
Yeah, there was. We our rotation was about 30 to somewhere between 30 and 50 days in the field, and then we would come back and stand down for about 7 days. And during that 7-day period, of course, we got our mail, and had the Stars and Stripes, and there was AFVN, the American Armed Forces Radio of Vietnam, and so we had, there was a lot of information, public information, and so we knew, and of course I knew from letters from home and that, so there was no secret about it, and we knew that pretty much from the time I knew it before I even left, because I left in if you look the timeline, Tet was January, February, March, April of '68, and of course I was in the States when that went on, and then I left and continued to get information, and then when I got back, the support for the war, of course, had continued to falter.
And so, yeah, you knew it going into it, which seems like it could be an advantage in terms of not being so shocked when you get back. Were people treating you differently when they found out you're a Vietnam vet? Yeah,
and I didn't make that a big deal. I didn't talk about it a lot, and I didn't, my hair had grown longer, and of course I was of draft age. I mean, that was pretty, that was pretty obvious, and so every once in a while somebody would ask me about my draft status, or they kind of eased into it, and I said, no, I'm not, I don't worry about the draft anymore. I've sort of been there, done that. And but that was about it. I mean, I used a lot of methodologies to kind of stop the conversation.
And, right, you can deflect those questions.
Absolutely.
And seems like you were vague and able to control the dialogue.
And people didn't pursue it. They got the hint, and they didn't pursue it for whatever personal reasons. But I was good at deflecting that, and they took the hint, and hence but rarely did I get the question. Even when I was at school here at Arizona State University, it was ASU at the time was pretty much a day school. They didn't have a whole lot of people living on campus. Most of their students lived at home, and so now that was a shock. I tell you, that was really quite a shock in interfacing with all these 17, 18-year-old freshmen, and here I was, a 23-year-old man.
Yeah, only a few years,
different.
Chronologically, but
yeah,
probably feeling a lifetime older, a lifetime of experience in between.
Absolutely.
When you were 18.
Yeah. I mean, what do you
remember
say?
that same thing myself.
You experienced the same thing, I'm sure. I mean, here you are, young age, and you've been around the world, fought a war, seen and done things that most people don't, and that you just don't relate. Hard to make that connection.
Yeah, the conversations were a rough start. I mean, about all I had in common with some of the people, besides the fact that we were at the same school and spoke the same language, might have been things like, "Oh, you were in the military, and what kind of weapons did you use?" And I told them, well, mostly an M16. Oh, I've used that on Call of Duty and whatever video game they were playing at the time. So usually the conversations didn't go farther than that, because you're right.
Yeah, and the time that I spent at ASU, only once did any professor, and it was a sociology professor, and I can't remember exactly what the subject was, but it started touching on the war and that, and of course, again, I'm 4 or 5 years older than all these folks that are around me, and the professor asked me if I had any experience with the military. It was a pretty soft question. I said, yeah, I was. And
I got a little bit.
And I said, yeah. And he asked me if I was a Vietnam veteran. I said, yes, I was. And again, I didn't go much further than that, but he was the only one that ever asked. And he wasn't much older than I was, actually. He was probably 3 or 4 years older than I was, and was teaching the sociology class, and he's the only one that approached the subject and actually asked the question in over 4 years, because I took some after I graduated. I still had some credits left on the GI Bill, so I took a semester's worth of graduate courses, and so 4.5 years, and he was the only professor that ever asked.
It seems like that question is just the elephant in the room. I'm imagining people kind of trying to do the math, looking at each other, sizing each other up. I wonder if this guy went. Did you go? But nobody really talking about it.
Yeah.
When did you start to notice changes in yourself, how you were different, or how your experience, in Vietnam had changed you?
Well, I had one of my coworkers. In fact, it was the fellow that I worked for early on, and it was it was a review time or something, and he just asked me straight out. He just looked at me and goes, "Why are you so angry?" And I, in my mind, I just thought, well, screw you. I'm not angry.
Yeah, that's just how I am.
Just the way I am. But change that, number one, that he asked, because I didn't think he was. I was totally taken back by his question, not only because of the question, but because who he was. And I didn't perceive him as being a particularly introspective kind of guy who would ask that kind of question. And I gave, I remember I denied it, And then after the denial, I stopped. I was back in my office, and I stopped and I thought, well, shit, why am I so angry? I mean, that's the question. And then I thought, well, I'm a few months out of a 12-month combat tour that just about took my life and took a lot of other people's lives, and I took a lot of lives, and it was an extraordinary time. So I was maybe a little pissed about that. Shortly after I got home, my dad was murdered. It may be that I was a little bit angry about that. And
yeah.
So it was, it was like, so I realized that, yeah, maybe I am angry. And then, oh, yeah, maybe I have, maybe there's reason for it. Maybe there's cause.
And so maybe there's a cause. And how long did it take for that thought to go a step further? I mean, one of the things you talked about before we started recording and when we're corresponding was forgiveness and for yourself and moral injury. How did that come to play in your life?
Another Vietnam veteran, a Marine, as a matter of fact, who had been, again, sort of, well, he had been judicially ordered into the service, and
the jail of the Marine Corps choice.
Yes, he and a buddy had been out drinking, and they got in a fight, and his buddy grabbed this guy, got him in a hold, and had his arms, locked down, and his buddy kept screaming, hit him. So, bam. And down the guy went. Well, charges were filed, etc. The choices were, jail or the Marine Corps. Which will it be? He landed in Hue City on the second or third day at Tet. And his first job during as a and he was trained up as a radio operator in RTO, and his first job was to carry body bags of folks coming out of the battle and loading them on trucks to take them away. So that was his introduction. He spent a year in the field as an RTO, so a lot of combat. Came back. Got married, had a kid, did a lot of drugs, did a lot of drinking, just was, and finally got into AA and started to turn his life around. We got to be really, really good friends. And at one point he saw what I was going through too, and knew the signs, and he was a guy that it was just, well, first of all, he was a no bullshit kind of guy to begin with. Second of all, straight as it is. He stayed with his AA program, and there is just, there's no space for BS. And
because a lot of people who go in there are professional bullshitters, so they know how to cut through. It's like, look, all right.
But I remember him
let's
saying
get to the facts.
To me, the first thing you have to do is forgive yourself. I remember those words, and I remember, what they meant, and I remember what he meant by it, and but I didn't understand it. But it stayed with me a long, long time, and even to this day. And that we're talking probably 30 years ago, and of course I was still in denial, but that stuck with me, and it goes to that goes to the issue of moral injury, and the things that you did and experienced while you were in the Army, in combat, in a wartime situation, So it's true. First, you have to forgive yourself, and once that transition takes place, you're able to do a lot more when it comes to healing and getting well again.
How does one go about forgiving themselves? I know my experience with that, but I also remember hearing that and just being baffled, just mystified. Just what does that even mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's hard to explain, but you understand that you probably did things when you were in those situations. Well, even, and I don't mean murderous things or illegal things. I'm just talking about the things that we had to do in combat as soldiers. And part of that is to, they give you a rifle for a reason. And that first time that you have to pick that rifle up and put somebody in the in your sights and shoot them and kill them. That's not an easy thing to do, and killing people is not sort of part of our makeup generally, unless you're a sociopath. But if you're
Right.
if you're a regular, normal human being, that's going to have an effect on you. And you don't come away from that feeling real good, and it's not something to be celebrated. It gets a little dicey because you have a lot of feelings going through you simultaneously, and one is you're really, really sad that this was the first time you actually took a life. It. It's not like, oh, I called an airstrike and I know we probably killed some people, but
yeah, your finger pulled that trigger.
Your
you saw
finger
that person
pulled
go
that
down.
trigger, and it was your bullet that went through that person, and that's not a real good. That's not something you celebrate. I mean, normal people.
Exactly. Even when it's it's me or them.
Yeah.
Even when it's that clear, that dire, it's still, you're right. It doesn't feel great. I mean, as humans, we're all wired to be empathetic towards each other and connect and to cooperate.
Yeah.
And so you got to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
And in the moment, maybe you feel a little bit, but I mean, anyone who's over there working on a deployment, you don't have that much time to be introspective, to contemplate. And
right.
So I guess when you get back, then that's when all the things start to just arrive, and you get the rest of your life to deal with that and wrestle with it in your mind.
And then there's other, there's a lot to divert you from, that introspection, and it could be getting married, it could be having kids, it could be getting that job, going to school, all those things that interfere, and it's just life getting in the way. And so, so that introspection comes to everybody at different times and in different ways. And I actively denied my feelings for a lot of years. And
that's one of those things it's when you say that, just about every veteran I work with, in my day job, I work for the vet center as a therapist. And so it seems the common experience, because that's what you learn from day one in basic training is, you complete mission completion is first, and, troop welfare is second, and then yourself last.
Yeah.
So it makes complete sense for gearing someone up for war and combat, and then getting back, though, trying to flip that around so you can figure out what the hell you just went through and how to deal with it is pretty tough.
Yeah, and a lot of people have different skill sets. They're in different places in their lives. I mean, some people have more summers in front of them than they got behind them. I happen to be one of the ones that has more summers behind them than they got in front of them. And so that makes a huge difference. and being having those life's experiences behind me. Now maybe I've got a little bit more time that for a little bit more introspection. I was fortunate that I had a sibling who saw what was going on and kind of kept after me. I mean, she was very gentle and was very sensitive to what I was going through, and never made me feel bad about it, but encouraged me. And so it was through her encouragement, actually, that helped me kind of step up. And so it was my time to figure out what I'd been through, how it affected me, where I was, what I should be doing, how I could help myself be well, be healthy, and so and that wasn't all too long ago. I mean, that was just a few years ago.
And so what did you do when you started making those steps towards being well?
I got counseling, went to the VA, set up an appointment to figure out what they had to offer. I went to them, basically said, here I am. I'm 60 plus years old. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm here. I need some help. And so I need help getting well. Something's wrong. It's like carrying that bullet inside you. You know it's there, and it rises up. It hurts every once in a while, but it's slowly working its way out. And so this is what it was for me. And so they said, well, here's a number of options. And I said, okay, I'm gonna take option number 2, which was individual therapy. And so I chose that. Had to go through a couple of different therapists because, and they told this is one of the things they told me. This is this is a little like speed dating right now, but you have to figure out
good point.
who you interact with the best. And it's not that you're a bad person or they're a bad person. You're just looking for that fit. And I found somebody, and we spent some time working with each other, and they were very, very helpful.
And so you start to connect some dots and patterns of your life after getting back, I imagine, and maybe you start to connect to some of the ways you felt about things and how that played into the course of your life. How did you change as a result of talking to somebody individually?
I felt a higher level of well-being is what I felt. And I also felt that I could really open up to, another human being. And as it turns out, I started a relationship with a woman who I'm living with now and have been with, and our relationship is much, much different than I've ever experienced before. And it feels healthy, it feels honest, it feels real, and it feels happy.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
So tell me about some of the work you're doing with the VA and some of the ways you've been interacting with other vets to try to share that same message.
When I also real briefly in 03 to 05, I was a security contractor in Iraq. In fact, mostly we spent most of our time in Anbar province.
So good. It's possible we've crossed paths before then.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at TQ, or just beyond TQ. Is on the, if you look at Ramadi and Fallujah, I was kind of on the other side of TQ at a base over there. A lot of engineers were blowing up captured munitions, and so that we were responsible for securing their safety and securing those assets. And then in '08, I worked for the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force in Afghanistan. So when I got back from that, I kind of got involved. I did the same thing. Well, what do I do now? And I knew this. Tempe's a small town in a lot of respects, and so I knew the mayor. And I said, what do you think? I'm not doing anything right now. I'm still full of energy. I got stuff to do. What would you do? He says, well, how about, he says, first of all, he says, how about, would you be interested in serving on a commission? I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. So I was appointed to the Civilian Police Review Commission. And then he asked me to do he says, well, we're thinking about doing a veterans memorial. Would you like to be involved in that? Which I did. Well, being involved in that and coming in touch with a lot of veteran-oriented organizations and people, I just kind of got deeper and deeper into it. It just so happened too that at that time, our State Department of Veteran Services had just hired a brand new director who was exactly my age, spent time in Vietnam about the same time I did. And so we just both hit it off and got to be good friends. And so he had asked me to get involved in a couple of things. And so it just, I kept going into it because it was fascinating. It was kind of I really enjoyed it. And it involved doing stuff for veterans and with veterans. And I really enjoyed that. So we looked at education, jobs, and wellness as the three circles of success. So it was focused on in each one of those areas. We were very, very successful in the higher education, modeling veteran success in higher education. And we're very successful in that. I was peripherally involved with jobs and economic opportunities, although that was more getting other people, other organizations involved. And then the wellness, I've done a lot of work with the VA, helped put together a veterans home here that was affordable, supportive, and permanent. So, feel like I've, done some good stuff. It makes me feel good. I just finished a renovation of a memorial World War I on Saturday. So those are the kind of things that I've been involved in.
Right. So you're giving back, you're serving once again.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you really found a really strong purpose working and to help other vets. And the housing is such a important thing, not just for the fact that, it's nice to live inside, but for anyone to really do this deeper work like you've done, the individual therapy and understand their experiences and try to heal, you have to have those basic needs taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just the way we're wired.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to worry about, feelings and thoughts until you got a roof over your head or something to eat. So,
yeah. And so I've been involved in the homeless veteran community and the levels of, shelters, transitional, permanent housing kind of model. And you just, until you have your basic needs met, you're not going to be focused on that next higher level of well-being.
Exactly. Yeah. And some people might be familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
It's just impossible. You might as well ask somebody to take wings and fly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are some of the things you do in your daily life that help you just connect with other people or deal with difficult thoughts and feelings? What are some of the ways you do that you've actively incorporated wellness into your own life?
I think part of it has to do with, on a daily basis, when I look across this broad spectrum of veterans' needs, and I'm always looking for that next project, that next initiative, not only how it will involve or benefit veterans, but I also have to quite frankly say, how will that benefit me? What part of me, what part of that project is going to help benefit me and make me feel good and fulfilled? And am I capable of doing that? I mean, there's been a couple of projects that I just didn't have the capacity to do, mostly the emotional capacity. I just don't. So I have to be I'm choosy about which projects I do because I know that it will affect me, and so that's a
crucial
conscious choice.
Point. Yeah, just knowing your own limits and knowing what's right for you in the situation, because it can be easy to jump into something with good intentions, but not being aware of if it's going to drag you down.
Right.
Yep. Rather than you being able to help this program, get off its feet So,
yeah. So it's coming in contact with folks like you, and being able to talk about my experiences, being able to be open about it, is that's a conscious choice, and one that when we finish this conversation, I'm already feeling good about it. So and I hope you are too. But
definitely,
it's an opportunity that is that I welcome, and hope to keep doing it in the future.
What would you tell a Vietnam vet who hasn't made that first step yet, who's hesitant of the VA or just hesitant to get into counseling or therapy?
Yeah. The first step, and this is a plug for the VA's program called Make the Connection. But it's absolutely true. You have to make a connection somewhere, whether it's your spouse, your girlfriend, your parents, a sibling, a pastor, whomever it is. You have to make a connection to another human being. That is just hugely, hugely important, because if we stay isolated inside ourselves, the chances are that's going nowhere good. And so, making that connection to somebody, friend, family. You could go on with all kinds of examples, but that's the most important step, I think, in the process.
So it's just opening up as much as you can, or just being real with somebody.
Just
in the moment.
Just one person, and that's that first step. And then you find out that maybe that wasn't so painful, and maybe that did feel kind of good, and maybe I should take that next step.
That's a good place to start off with. I like that. It's not overcomplicated.
Yeah.
It's simple and it's powerful. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Well, where can people hear more about the work you're doing and the work you're doing with Make the Connection?
Well, the website, there's a website. It's called Make the Connection, and it's got a lot of stories, short stories. It's not an hour-long story, but there's short vignettes of veterans like myself and our experience and how we made that connection. And so, and it goes across generations, genders, races, conflicts. So, if you're a young black female who served in Desert Storm, you can find stories. You can find stories on that site about that. And so it's really kind of an encouragement. It helps people understand that, hey, there's somebody just like me, or there's several people there just like me, and look what they did. So if they could do it, maybe I can do it.
Yeah, just that being able to relate to someone else or see there's somebody else out in the world who might understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
The importance of that cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
And I'll link to on our show notes and when I post this on the blog and the website, we'll link to make the connection and some of the videos there so people can see firsthand what you're talking about.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your time today, David. And
Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure.
I'm so grateful to you and your generation. The Vietnam vets have done so much for my generation to make sure that we got welcomed home and that we got reintegrated into society as best we could. So if it wasn't for you guys, there would be a lot of us off in the wilderness somewhere. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been great talking to you, and I hope our paths cross again.
I'm sure they will. I have that feeling.
All right, brother. Thank you.